If you grew up in and around a Christian church, chances are from time to time you heard something about demons.
Whether it was an afternoon seminar, a men's group, or in your church's morning service, the topic of the occult, the other side, and the denizens that inhabit it probably came up from time to time.
Now, on the other hand, if you didn't grow up in and around church, you're probably scratching your head wondering, where is this going? The idea of a spiritual world is one that often finds Christians at odds with their secular counterparts.
After all, if you're a secular materialist, what more is there to life than atoms and neutrons and protons? We are all matter, and the only things we can really know for sure about the universe are the things that pertain to that physical matter.
On the other hand, if you are a run-of-the-mill Bible-believing Christian, there's a good chance that you believe that behind this world is another world.
A world of angels and demons, of powers and principalities in the heavenly realms, as the Apostle Paul puts it.
And that from time to time, that world collides with ours.
Whether God and his angels or Satan and his followers.
But even if you're a Christian, there's a good chance that you also struggle with the idea of a world that can't be seen, felt, or heard.
And yet is just as real, if not even more real, than the one where you and I live.
This episode is going to be a little different to the last few that we've done.
We're not going to be interspersing it with clips from TV, film, or YouTube, and we're not even going to weigh in from time to time like we usually do.
The other thing you might notice about this episode is that it doesn't have the same level of cut and polish that we usually finish our episodes with. To give you a little peek behind the curtain, we usually edit out all of the ums and ahs and all those little imperfections that we don't mean to say, but we just naturally say as humans. In this situation, though, I felt that to edit out all of those little bits and pieces would take away from the raw authenticity of the interview. So I left them in. I don't think it takes anything away, and if anything, I felt it made the overall interview a little more human.
Today, we're talking to Jamie Lane.
Jamie is a friend of mine, and he is someone who has an extraordinary story, a story that most people would probably find unbelievable.
Jamie's is a story of abuse, drug use, demons, and the other side. Take this as your content warning. There are no swear words, there are no sex scenes, but this is a bit of a heavy episode. We will be talking about abuse, we will be talking about drug use, and yes, we will be talking about the occult and demons.
And so if this is a topic that you've ever been curious about, well, now is your opportunity to hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak.
Welcome to Science Radio, episode 203, Demons and the Drugs They Like.
Hey, Jamie.
Hey.
Great to have you. Thank you for coming on the podcast. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about you? People have read the title of the podcast. They kind of know what they're in for, but they're not really prepared for what they're in for. So before we get into it, do you want to just tell us a little bit about you? I was going to say your childhood and all that, but who are you and what do you do with yourself these days? What are you passionate about? All that sort of thing.
Okay. Yeah, so my name's Jamie, and I work for the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Yeah.
And as in the child protection agency called AdSafe, and we investigate and oversee high-risk individuals that attend churches. So that's where I am now.
So a really fun job.
Yeah, fun job. And before this, I was working in homelessness for about 15 years. And and I think my own personal history has given me a lot of insight into that world as well, because there's a lot of drug and alcohol abuse and mental health issues and a whole range of things that perhaps in some way my history prepared me for.
Sydney born and bred?
Sydney born and bred, convict heritage.
All right. Have you traced your ancestry back to
the 1799? I think it's the 9th Fleet.
Wow.
And an Irish guy named Thomas Dunn.
Thomas Dunn. And he got done for
He got
something.
done for stealing brown paper.
Oh, man.
It was a luxury item. He deserved every last year of his sentence.
Well, fast forward from the 18th century to now, Jamie, we're here to talk about, I guess, part of your story, a small snippet of it, because it's not everything that there is to know about you specifically, but I suppose in the context of this wider conversation about spiritualism and the other side, as it were, this is something that you do have a lot of experience in. So I want to just, I guess, start where you want to start. Where did this start for you? Around what age? And sort of what was it that first drew you into, I guess, this world?
Okay, so when I was young, I was raised in a Christian household. Well, my mum was Christian, my dad wasn't. But I actually had a really good connection with God when I was very young. I remember being kept up at night pondering the fact that God doesn't have a beginning. deep psychological thing for a 4 or 5 year old to stay up at night thinking about. But I had a really deep connection with Jesus, and I that had my life not been disrupted, I probably would have continued in that world. But then when I was about 5 or 6, I was abused by a stranger, and that really kicked me off that path, and sort of, I guess that changed a lot of things, and a lot of confusion and anger and fear and all of those things that comes with trauma. And so I guess that that also disrupted my relationship with Jesus and with the church. It had nothing to do with the church, the abuse, but it just sort of disrupted that path. And I remember I was visiting a friend, staying at a friend's place one night, and their neighbours came over and wanted to show me a magic trick. And it was a really strange trick. I like magic tricks, but this is not something that I've seen done as an illusion. And someone, they lit a cigarette lighter, put his hand in the flame, and it wasn't burning. And then I was like, he said, you can do it too. So I put my finger in this flame. It was right in the flame, and it wasn't burning. And I remember going, that's odd. And the next day I found the lighter, and I was going to show my brother, and I said, look at this. And I lit it, put my finger in, and burnt myself. And I was like, what? And that was odd. But a few years later, many years later, I experienced some similar kind of things that made sense of that. So I guess that was one little thing that was different to what I understood the world to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So you were a kid and you were trying to process all of this trauma. I'm assuming, you would have been pretty mad at God and the church, and I guess maybe your family or something like that for letting this sort of thing happen, or
well, no.
disrupting.
So I look, nobody knew about it, so I couldn't blame anyone. And I I kept it to myself for a long time, and it was. But I was. It made me, just question why things had happened, I guess. And then when I was about 12 or 13, I started getting interested, as you do, like with popular music, and then I started finding about exploring older music, and I got really fascinated with the Beatles and the whole psychedelic music from the 60s, and that was kind of like a bit of an invitation to that there was another world that I didn't know anything about, and so I found out a little bit about psychedelic drugs through some of that music, and yeah, that piqued my interest. I thought maybe there is a way to escape my own pain, and so I became really interested in that seemingly pretty innocent kind of world. So I was really fascinated by that scene, and explored that a lot throughout my early teenage years. And I guess early on, when I was even 13, I was like, I wanted to try LSD.
Did you have much of a conception of like the Christian understanding of the spiritual world, or was this kind of just a completely random different thing for you?
Yeah, so I didn't make the link between the spiritual world and the psychedelic thing. Look, probably because maybe I was a bit sheltered by some of those things. But growing up, I used to have night terrors when I was a kid, and I used to be. I was terrified to go on the ghost train. I never went on the ghost train until I was about 20.
Oh wow!
At the Easter show, and so yeah, this wasn't something that I thought I would find myself in, and I knew a little bit about the spiritual warfare that I grew up in a household where the idea that there is a Satan, was and an opposing force to good in this world, but look, the way these things are we're introduced to them isn't always so clear. And
well, it seems like the psychedelic kind of stuff, of the music from the 60s and that whole sort of subculture, it seems, at least from your perspective, to have been fairly far removed from a lot of those ideas, if you had them in the first place, about Satan and demons and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, and it really just challenges, what's good and what's evil, the perspectives that we have. Growing up in a Christian household, sometimes things can be very black and white, and that's not to say that some things aren't. Some things are, but the crossover between spiritualism and spiritual is sometimes really hard to discern.
And I suppose in some ways it would have felt like you were kind of growing up and maturing, like you're seeing a side of life that you were never permitted to see, perhaps, like there's a higher, set of ideas or ideals above the black and white sort of right and wrong that you may have been grown up with, sort of thing.
Yeah, look, it really kind of broadened my understanding of those boundaries for sure. Not necessarily in a good way, but I think most teenagers are going to explore the world and start to question things and find things that they weren't informed about. And for me, I became informed about a whole other culture that has been pretty much in existence for thousands of years, and grown alongside the Christian narrative. And so, look, when I was in high school, I actually became friends with a guy. He wasn't he wasn't a Christian, and he knew a little bit about some of this stuff. He liked the Beatles, and he also liked punk music. He introduced me to punk music like the Sex Pistols and bands like that. And he also his brother had tried psychedelic drugs, and he he was a different kind of person. So I went to his house, and he showed me he had a deck of tarot cards, and he showed it to me, and I was like, I don't want anything to do with that. So I and he was like, whatever, and he sort of passed them to me, and I didn't like open them. I just like grabbed them and then put them down. And I know this sounds strange, but I kind of immediately understood how they worked.
Okay. So like there was some kind of transference of knowledge?
I don't know. It's really hard to explain, but this is something that's happened a few times in my experience where it was I grasped the concept. No one had ever explained it to me, but I just grasped the concept how these random cards could maybe be a mirror of different branching pathways of futures and things like that. And I just sort of grasped it pretty much immediately without any introduction, which that's something we can ponder maybe a bit later. But it was strange. So, and I've had this experience in a few things and in a few different areas where it's like an epiphany, but you see a different something new.
So, the drug use was that the thing that kind of came next, of experimenting with different substances and different forms and functions and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah. So I was interested in these things when I was about 15. I guess I tried marijuana and I'd been I was as teenagers. Sorry, parents out there, your teenagers probably are up to more than you know. And we were drinking on occasions. There was a few times I got drunk when I was like 13 or 14. It wasn't very pleasant. But I was always still looking for that experience with LSD and with hallucinogens. So that was something that I was really interested in. And I'd read up about some of these experiences, and I read a book, a famous book called Go Ask Alice. It was a journal of a girl who had these experiences and then died. So her journal ends abruptly, and it was a very well-known book in the 70s and 80s. And I read her book, and rather than it turning me off, it just piqued my interest because she's describing this otherworldly experience. And I was like, oh, wow, maybe there's another way to that place that, been promised through my Christian upbringing, but that I felt a little bit cut off from.
So this is, I suppose, would you kind of equate this with the Christian experience of like the peace that passes understanding, or feeling like you're, in God's will, or in the, would even heaven be the right term to kind of describe whatever it is that Christians are supposedly chasing? Yeah,
look, Pete, that is something that Christianity offers, and I've found actually can produce and can deliver, but I guess that wasn't what I didn't know enough about that. I just wanted a different world.
It was more of an instinct, maybe, than like I've actually thought about it. Like there's a hole or a gap that I feel needs to be filled, and this is the way that I think it's going to happen.
I guess there's this suspicion that there's more to this world than what we see with our eyes and the day-to-day mundane experience, and so just what I'd read about the psychedelic experience, even though it sounds strange and it sort of maybe offered another world. And that's really what. So a bit of a booby prize.
Yeah. Okay, well let's talk then about the next, I suppose, layer to this whole thing, because it's not just about drug usage, but there's as you've already alluded to a couple times, there's kind of I suppose, a loose structure, organization, group that's sometimes referred to as the occult or witchcraft, wizardry. And I just want to acknowledge as well, there are probably a lot of people listening to this podcast who are pretty skeptical. We think of modern, atheists, agnostics, people who are, humanist. There's probably a lot of people who are thinking, okay, this is getting into weird territory. And I think even for a lot of Christians, this is probably getting into weird territory as well. Because I guess, let's face it, this is not something that your everyday average person has ever really come into contact with. Or if they did, they probably didn't know what it was. So could you tell us what's the pathway into this world? Is drug use required? Is it just correlation, not necessarily causation? Are they linked? What is the way that one gets into this I guess lifestyle?
Yeah, so look, the music scene has cultural links with occult ideas, which are really, the occult just means hidden. It means a hidden way, and a lot of, especially through the psychedelic counterculture of the 60s, there was a lot of crossover with the occult. Some famous bands like Led Zeppelin and others were actively and very publicly acknowledged their participation in the occult, and so that whole counterculture scene had a lot of links with the occult. So my friend that showed me these tarot cards, he also introduced me to information about a 19th century occultist whose face is on a Beatles album, by the way, and in the background, one of those many faces on the Lonely Hearts Club Band album. And look, I wouldn't have known about this stuff with my upbringing, and I generally don't like to name this person whenever I talk about, because I don't want to be introducing people to rabbit holes. And he's a pretty well known person. I'll just call him AC. He. So I through my friend's exploration of that culture, and he'd introduced me to some of these things, and I was like not interested. This is evil, and I still had some kind of semblance of the things that sound evil are probably evil. And so I left that on the shelf for some time, but I started getting into when I left school. This is like 1990. Sorry, I'm that old, and the rave scene was really kicking off in Sydney, and it wasn't the kind of music I was into. I wasn't really into this electronic stuff and house. I really liked punk and sort of grungy sort of music and avant-garde music and some different stuff. But I found after some time, I met some people that were involved in the house scene, and so there was a little bit of crossover there, and that was a bit of a way to get LSD, because that scene was heavily, acid house was what was based on this experience. And so I started to try LSD and ecstasy and these things, but and those experiences were interesting. But I also started using other drugs like speed, amphetamines, and heroin when I was actually pretty young, which is look, I to this day I don't know why.
It sounds like a pretty lethal combination altogether.
Yeah, well, I wasn't always doing them at the same time, but not always, but sometimes. And yeah, it was very quick. I had in some ways thought, look, I'm just going to do my own thing, and so the first time I tried amphetamines, I injected it which is probably not the usual pathway. I was only 16, and then by the time I was 17, I used heroin semi-regularly. I wouldn't say I had a habit, but it was starting to get that way. And then I had a bit of a shock and sort of got away from that, and then sort of started focusing on the rave scene, and I'd met some friends that were my age and were also using drugs, and we started. They were very different to my world. They were into the graffiti scene and hip hop, and I wasn't really into that at all. But we ended up becoming really good friends. So we were clubbing, spending days partying at a time. My parents were clearly deeply worried, and but I felt like it was helping me forget my pain, and it kind of gave me a sense of belonging somewhere. And then early on in my use of drugs, I tried LSD, and I had, similar to when my friend handed me the deck of tarot cards, it was like this vision. It was like an epiphany where I saw this whole new movement, this new world ahead of me. With it was like an anti-establishment, people brandishing smiley faces, talking about love. It was all idealistic and free from dogma and false ideas and all these relics from the past. It was like this new world, and I kind of saw this vision of it, of this counterculture. I caught the vision, so to speak, and that really gave me a big shift. And so I was sold, and I was deeply into this scene. I was connected with promoters and DJs and drug dealers and all sorts of people. It was very exciting, but also, there were some times where it was not so fun. But I started taking acid quite a bit, and I'd say I had some really mystical experiences. And that was really the link with the occult. So what had happened, I was working for the Co-op bookshop, and I was an avid reader. And then there was this book on my shelf that caught my attention, and it was by that occultist that I mentioned earlier, and it was his autobiography. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I opened it up, and there was this drawing that he drew of this. I don't know if it's a spirit or something that he was in communication with, and I'd seen this same face. I'd seen it in a dream, and I was like, oh, that's odd.
So when you say spirit, are we talking about something that looks like a person? Or
Yeah,
like
it looks a bit like an alien, actually, oddly. And but I'd seen this similar kind of face in a dream, and anyway, so I thought, this is odd. So for some reason, I bought the book because it wasn't about it wasn't a book on the occult. It was a book, an autobiography. Yeah. And so I read his autobiography, and I started to get the idea that hey, this guy isn't necessarily selling evil. He's basically challenging the social norms and the establishment, and it seemed exciting, and it opened up a lot of he talked about people that were involved in these ideas over history, and really it just I sort of had this idea. It was like, he's just doing what I'm doing, which is shirking the established order and just trying to create a new world, a new life. And
so you saw virtue in his methodology and his ideas, I suppose.
Yeah, you could say that. And so it's you expect something that people tell you that's evil would sound evil. He's got a wicked sense of humor, And it was an interesting book, and I started going, all right, and through that there were some occult ideas that he introduced me to, and one of them was Kabbalah, which is based on Jewish mysticism. And so there's this diagram that I saw, and in the same way that I had the vision with tarot, I saw this diagram, and I understood it. I at least got the concept, and thought this is really interesting, because while I'm out there exploring places where I've literally lost my mind on LSD, this could be some kind of anchor point, some way a map to find my way in any strange experience. And so that interested me, and I started to look into that, and I started to read about the history of the occult, its influences on modernism and the world, and really there is a whole other culture there that's been growing alongside the Christian worldview, especially in the last 300 years, where after printing, or 500 years after printing, that's sort of really been working alongside, and has been really influential in ways that most people aren't aware of. Its impact on the world and politics and philosophy.
Could we talk a little bit about like just the raw experience of being high, sort of thing? How much are you willing to say about that?
Yeah. So look, with heroin was good for, well, it's not good. Let me make that clear. In the sense that it really masks pain. That's what it's made to do. It is made to mask physical pain, but it also masks emotional pain. I remember seeing this like an ad. It was like a joke ad. It said, "Heroin, a million dead junkies can't be wrong." And
oh man, that is rough.
It's rough, but there's a bit of truth in that. It's saying why do people drawn to this stuff? It masks pain. It does a really good job of that, and but then it introduces a whole other range of pain as well. So I in the late 90s, I started losing friends. They were dying from overdoses, and so that wasn't a good time. And amphetamines was another thing. Like, you could stay up and you could go to a 3-day festival and literally stay awake the entire time and dancing, and it was.
So with heroin, it's a high. It's you're masking pain. With amphetamine, is it also a high, or is it just giving you lots of energy?
Yeah, it's a high. It's like I guess it's a bit like skydiving kind of high. It's an adrenaline release, and so you're, and it was good, but when you've been awake for a few days, you start to have sleep deprivation and some forms of drug-induced psychosis, which is not pleasant. Where you you can start getting a little bit agitated and then wanting to go back to that high.
Right.
So amphetamines was very addictive, and I used it a lot through the 1990s for a lot of 10 years. I used a lot of amphetamines and ice, and before it was known as ice, it used to just be called methamphetamine, look, that was one thing. But then I had the psychedelic thing, which was not very good on amphetamines. It made it very easy to become psychotic, and because your mind is racing faster than you're and you're already in a place that's strange. So I started using a lot of LSD, and then in the late 1970s, I'm not that old. In the late 90s, a friend of mine was a psychedelic shaman, so to speak, and he introduced me to this stuff that he was making called DMT.
Oh.
And DMT was a little bit different, as it's not a recreational drug, and frankly, it feels a bit like an interdimensional portal.
DMT has very much become a popular thing nowadays,
It has,
but I imagine
yeah.
back then it probably wasn't so much
it's pretty
so.
rare, pretty hard to get hold of, and it's not something that someone will say, "Hey, try this." It's very different, and for me, when I tried that, it was different. It was I saw beings, like they entities. This is all very well researched now. John Hopkins University has actually done a big study on people's experiences, and they actually tried to map this landscape of this place.
We're talking about an alternate dimension almost.
That's what it seems like, yeah.
And you talked about how this occultist saw a particular being. He drew it. You'd seen it in a dream, and I'm imagining that you're not the only one who's probably come into contact with the same kinds of specific beings or entities or whatever.
Yeah. So, look, the whole alien abduction thing is very similar.
Right.
In fact, it's almost too similar. You go, there must be some kind of connection. In fact, a lot of people think that whatever people are experiencing, if they claim to have been abducted by aliens, is actually the release of this substance, dimethyltryptamine, from their brain, which it's already naturally occurring in everyone's brain, and I guess they reason that it could be released for some reason, and people experience this event. And,
I'm just imagining somebody in like rural Iowa lying in bed, and then suddenly this rogue chemical gets released in their brain, and then suddenly is born the myth of I was taken up into a spacecraft and probed by an alien sort of thing.
Yeah, and look, it's different because with LSD, it's just sort of visual distortions and look, it kind of produces an effect that seems to have meaning, carry a lot of meaning, and a sense of being unified with the world and with time and space. Looks very different, and it can be both ecstatic and it can also be terrifying. You can have a really bad experience as well. But DMT was something different. It's sort of my experiences with that are akin to any other memory I've ever had about any other place I've ever been. Just like it's like I've just been to another place.
So I think it's important we can distinguish then between being high, in which I'm assuming you probably retain some semblance of maybe what happened, but a lot of it is like just blank. Whereas with a psychoactive or psychedelic drug, you're saying you can remember stuff, like it's just it's a memory.
It's a memory, yeah. And the place. Look, there is what people claim are entities. They try to communicate with you, and you have this very looming suspicion that I'm not making this up. This isn't my brain making this up. This is something other trying to communicate.
I don't know what you want to share with the fine folks listening to the podcast, but I do remember you sharing with me once you were in a park with a friend of yours and you're both high and you both saw the same thing at the same time.
Yeah, that's happened a couple of times. I've had a shared experience, shared hallucination, but and that time was we saw some. Well, they kind of looked like great gods coming out of the trees and literally were surrounding us, and it was very strange, very different. Yeah. So there is that, and this is where I started to get involved in the deeper into the occult, into Kabbalah. I had been going to the raves and doofs. By then they started to become known for many years, and then then in the early 2000s, I'd been reading a lot of books on by the author that I was talking about earlier, and he basically was the head of a secret society that still operates today, and at one of the places where I was buying drugs, a girl said, "Oh, do you know about that stuff?" And I was like, "Yeah, I guess a little bit." And she was like, "Oh, I'm actually in that group," and and so that was interesting. And then some years later, I saw her again, and then she said, "Oh, my boyfriend used to be the master of the temple in that group. Do you want to meet him?" And I had actually before this, I'd met another person who was involved in this group and went to one of they have a public ritual that is
like open to the public.
Well, it's by invitation, but it's you can attend for part of this ritual, and so I went along to that, and that was interesting. And then and look, I have to say this now. I'm pretty ashamed of all of this. I want to say this. I'm not advocating this in any way. In fact, now that I'm a Christian, when I look back, this ritual was outright blasphemous and insulting to our God and to my God, and I'm deeply ashamed of that, of my participation in that. But then when this girl we were talking, I told her about my experiences on DMT, and then she did introduce me to her friend, and they found what I was saying about what I saw on DMT is very interesting. So I think there's some kind of connection there between this world and the world that group is part of. And so from this point, I'd been studying the occult for some years. I was practicing. By then, also, I'd gotten into tarot because it actually is very similar to Kabbalah. It's actually modeled on Kabbalah, I found out later. And I started reading tarot, not to read the future. It was sort of more like a window into explaining the world, I guess.
Making sense of things that didn't make sense.
Yeah, and it sort of comes with its own philosophy. But I was pretty well versed in all this stuff, and I had lived in houses where there was a lot of activity that isn't normal, where bookshelves would just fly down, slam down, like someone had thrown them off the wall, and where there were times I was at home alone, and my dog would just start barking at a shadow in the corner of the room, and things would just run through the house, knocking everything and banging on walls, and this was happening pretty frequently, and so I started having quite a few experiences that weren't drug related, that were very different, and I guess what people call poltergeist kind of activity, and I had a friend, and he was an Indonesian guy, and he was also had the Indonesian system of the occult that he was involved with, and he showed me some stuff that he could do with, like putting a knife into his arm and not bleeding and pulling it out and it wasn't cut, things like this. And that reminded me of what I'd seen when I was a child with the flame. And I realized, and he explained to me quite frankly, he said, I've got a jinn, I've got a demon that helps me do this. And so I had all these experiences, and then that all culminated with an invitation to be initiated, and that was where I basically I won't talk too much about that, except that generally it's an invitation to reject the other side, which is God and Jesus, and for some reason I couldn't do it. I remember back when I was a child and I had this connection with God, and while I had flown off that path, I still had nothing in any way against Jesus, even when I was looking into this other stuff that I knew, and even though it didn't appear evil on the outside, the deeper you get into it, you realise that there's quite a blurred line between what we think is good and evil, and actually some things are just evil, and they just don't look it. So I that was where things really took a turn. And after when I wanted to fight this, I was like, no, I don't want to reject God. And then I basically experienced a few years of a lot of demon harassment for a few years, where it was very much like they didn't want to let go.
Like, how dare you come this close but not go the whole way, sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly. Actually,
Okay.
and also, as though there was some ownership,
Right.
and in a sense, they did own something. They owned all the experiences I had that drifted me away from God, and they had become part of my identity and character. The parts that are part of my identity, they did own that. They absolutely own that. And the threat is that without that, you'd be nothing. And you have this foreboding sense of I got into points of depression where I at night I was just waiting for the day to dawn, and then in the day I'd just be hoping that the night would come. And
just no sort of enjoyment out of life.
No, it was pretty dark, dark time, and there was times where there was reprieve from that, but then you realise that this wasn't just a completely subjective experience. There were people around me that were completely aware of the battle that I was going through and had been through similar ones, and were all waiting for me to reject God, basically, and come along to the party. And I just couldn't do it. So.
Sorry, I just want to dig into one quick thing. I know you don't want to delve into too much, but I'm just interested in the interplay between this world and God, because it sounds like from what you're saying, there's a fairly significant, serious realization on the part of these folks of the power of God and I suppose, the line between opening yourself up to God and whatever life that He might want for you, and the life on the other side, which I guess for me, and probably for a lot of people, sounds somewhat surprising. Like, it's like, oh, well, this is just a better life, just don't worry about that stuff. But it sounds like what they were asking you was literally to just completely turn your back.
They wanted me to close the door.
Yeah.
And that was literally what was happening. And
which just is interesting to me, that this kind of group would place such a heavy emphasis on, I guess you could say, Judeo-Christian faith. Like, that they take that so seriously that they want you to leave it all behind, sort of thing.
Yeah. So actually, the occult, in a nutshell, is the building of a new world, and it's based on principles that are very different to the Judeo-Christian worldview, and which interestingly is pretty much what the Bible says.
Right.
So it shouldn't be a shock to too many Christians out there.
Powers and principalities and
exactly, and they really are present, and I've experienced this, and I know that they're very watchful. They're very aware of how things happen. They want people to reject God and start their world where they have a lot more influence. And look, it sounds good on the outside. It sounds good where you can do what you want, but there is also a heavy price, and And while it might look like you're doing what you want, you're really not. You're really controlled by the things that you're doing, and the life and the community that they have. They're very much aware of the need people have to belong to a community, and yeah, they would prefer you're part of the community. That
it sounds very exploitative.
Yeah, it may not seem that way, and I'm sure a lot of people are thankful for who don't know God, are thankful for what this has offered them. But and some people, I'm sure, have claimed fame and fortune through it. Sure. But it is really, in a nutshell, it is it's very much contained, and it's not the free pass that it claims to be.
So you spent a number of years after this point really quite traumatized by, the lingering presence of dark entities and things like that. But the story doesn't end there, because you did have a kind of a turnaround moment where things changed quite dramatically for you. Do you want to tell us about what that was like?
Yeah, so I'd gotten away from Sydney because I was trying to get away from everything really, and I was up in North New South Wales, and within a few years I'd had another group of friends and similarly links to the occult and drugs and all of that, and I had come to a point where this battle was really weighing on me. I wanted to have peace. I didn't have any peace, and really it was, look, curse God and just do what you want, and why not? Like why not? Like you're still using, and I couldn't explain why not. I just didn't. I just couldn't reject Jesus. I even many people that don't know him, they accept that his force. There's a lot of good in what Jesus has done for the world, but for me, I remember this connection I had when I was very young, and I just couldn't let go of it. And I actually think it's more the other way around, that he wasn't letting go of me without a fight, and he would if I had. And this is the thing with the occult, you have to reject God. God's not rejecting you, but I didn't know that at the time. I thought I was pretty much rejected, but I just didn't want to close that. And so I was in this place where basically I was pretty suicidal. I was at a point where I was going to really hurt myself, and at this point where I was really going to draw blood in some ways, there was this presence in the room with me and just said, and not in a voice, it wasn't audible, I just knew what it was saying in my heart. It was just, you don't need to do this. I've already drawn my blood for you.
Wow. And this is unprompted. You're just in a random place that would not have otherwise engendered this kind of response.
Yeah, no, I was at the lowest point in my life, and I wasn't looking. I wasn't saying, God, where are you? I wasn't. Yeah. It was none of that.
He came to you.
Yeah.
So what happened after that?
And so that week, straight away I was like, okay then, like, well, show me, because I have no power over what's happening, and then I that week I was still smoking cigarettes. I was a pretty heavy smoker, and I was still smoking pot, which was up in North New South Wales is pretty normal, and it wasn't like I didn't have any guilt about those things. It was just that's what I was doing, but I was like still pondering what has happened, and then. So I was raised in a Seventh-day Adventist home, and we knew to respect Sabbath on a Saturday, and I And on a Friday evening, this was a few days later, I was sitting out on my veranda and smoking a cigarette, and I saw the sun going down, and it just popped into my head, it's Sabbath. And so I remembered what had happened this week, and so I didn't even finish my cigarette. I just put it out, and I went, okay then, and then I felt led. It was like,
and presumably the first time that you thought about this in decades.
Yeah, exactly. And so I just went, okay, and then it was like, go to bed. And, it was early, but I hadn't been sleeping very well, and I remember going into my room and I, in my mind's eye, when I say that, I didn't physically see this, but I just knew I had 2 doors into my room. It was a strange house. There was two of everything, 2 doors to every room, 2 light switches in every room. It was a strange place, but and I pictured, I didn't picture, I just sort of had this sense. I knew it was like there were 2 angels guarding the doors. I can't explain it. I didn't see it. I just sort of knew it. And then had the probably the best night's sleep I'd had in a very long time. And then I woke up and it was like, go to church. So I was like, okay. So there was a Seventh-day Adventist church around the corner, and I went, all right, I'll go along. So I walked in there, and I had black nail polish on, and I looked like a dark elf, and I walked in there, had a beanie on, and my head was shaved, and look, interestingly, at this point, someone came up to me and said, take your hat off, you're in a church. Oof. And I could have walked out, but I just went, whatever. I just wanted to be invisible, so I took it off. And I picked up a Bible, and I opened it up, and I didn't know what I wasn't, looking. I just opened it up, and everything I was reading was talking directly to what had been happening. And I remember reading, the things you don't want to do, they're the things that you end up doing, and the things that you want to do, you can't do, and you have no power. And that there is this war for your between your mind and your body, and it was a strange thing, because I was reading it for about an hour, and it was like a conversation with God, and the Bible was just speaking directly to what was happening in my life, but also at that moment. And it was like a conversation. It wasn't like reading a book, and it was just, these words are inspired, and I remembered reading as well that these things that are worthy of death in some ways, and I felt like, yep. I agree. I'm worthy of death. I looked at my life, the friends that had overdosed on drugs, and I'd endorsed that lifestyle, and I took responsibility for what, I didn't try to lead them away into something better. I endorsed that world, and many friends have died through that. Not that I gave them any, that was their choices, but I just felt my part in that world, and I felt really responsible for it, and I didn't try and hide it. I just said, "Yep, I'm worthy of death," and I just expected that God would strike me down straight away. Like, I literally felt that I was being judged, and I accepted it. I just went, "Yep, I accepted that God was righteous." And that my world was not righteous, and righteousness has to exist. It has to be, and the paths that lead to death, something has to happen. And so I just went, yep, I deserve death, and so I expected to die. But then the next thing I read was I didn't send my son into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And and that just changed everything that I understood about God. I just went, what? I'm not being condemned. I was like, well, who's condemning me? And I had this sense, it's like, that's the one that you've been hanging out with. and I realized that God is. It changed my whole understanding of God, and it was a shift. It was like when my understanding of God changed, it was like I changed, and I didn't realize, but I guess I had surrendered. I hadn't tried to fight for my existence. I literally had just laid it down and went, yeah, you decide, because I'm unworthy. But then God really showed me that He thought that I was worth that people. You know, I realized God is fighting for each one of us, and doesn't let go. So yeah, and since then I haven't smoked. I quit smoking that night when I didn't. I wouldn't even say I quit. I just didn't have the desire to do it, and I didn't have any withdrawals or anything. Just left. I didn't have any desire for any other drugs. It was just left. It wasn't there. And then I went home, and I remembered my flatmates were saying, you know, where have you been? And I said, oh, I gave my heart to Jesus Christ. What did you do?
I'm sure that went down like a lead balloon.
Yeah, they went, what? And I said, yeah, I went to church. And they were like, what? But it's odd, because the moment I declared it, then I felt like I'd already had peace. Like at that time in church, it was like I went, well, where's the darkness had left? I was like, it was like a breath of fresh air. But when I declared it to someone and just shared it, and I just said it. You know, it was hard to say. It would have been hard to say, but I just went, no way, this is good. Like I feel different. And then as soon as I shared it, it was like this. I know this sounds so cliched, but a weight lifted off, and then this peace, the peace that surpasses all understanding. I had that, and the first thing I realized was this is exactly what I was trying to find in drugs and couldn't get. It mimics some of it, but it only masks it. Whereas this literally removed the pain, and so I haven't looked back.
I'm still trying to imagine you with black nail polish, shaved head, and a beanie. I think that it must have been.
I still wear a beanie sometimes.
well, it's a pretty good look. Thank you, Jamie. I know, you know, to give everybody a bit of context, this is not easy for anybody to share. And the fact that Jamie's shared this, I think I'm grateful. And I know a lot of people listening to this will be grateful as well. And your life since then has been completely different to the life that you used to lead.
Yeah, I went back and studied social community services and social work, and I started working in field of homelessness. I was volunteering at ADRA, at a cafe in Cabramatta, and I thought, I'll go and do that. And people were talking to me about this offloading, you know, they had addiction, and I just went, none of this phases me. And so I know a lot of people, it makes them very uncomfortable. And I went, this is something I could do. So I went back and studied, and then through that I found really interested in the homelessness scene. Now I would never have called myself homeless, but there were times when, like, I lived in Byron, but I lived on the beach for 6 months. So
sounds all right.
Yeah,
I mean,
it was pretty good. I woke up and just jumped into the ocean each morning, and so. But I would never called myself homeless. I wasn't. I had places to go. I just was doing what I was doing.
But I mean, we've come to, I think, learn in society that, you know, even if you're surfing on somebody else's couch, that's still
tertiary secondary homelessness. But I started working in homelessness, and where. Yeah, people with, you know, really acute schizophrenia and drug and alcohol problems and addiction, and I loved it actually. I was I really I really liked that. And then just about five or so years ago, I was thinking about doing something different, and then a friend of mine asked me about, hey, have you ever thought about working? I work for an organisation that manages sexual abuse in the church, and I was like, man, that's hard. And so I said, yeah, maybe I should do that.
It sounds like you're almost a sucker for punishment.
A little bit.
Yeah. But I mean, look, I can say from experience as a pastor, I've actually worked with Jamie a little bit when I was a pastor, and I have the utmost respect for you folks who do what a lot of people in our church just cannot, just absolutely cannot. AdSafe is such an important resource for the church. Look, we are almost out of time. Well, we are out of time. But I think it would be remiss of me if I didn't ask you to speak to two people, and I think you're probably the best resource that a lot of people are going to have on this. I first want you to talk to people who are skeptics, secular humanists, people who just think all there is to life is this life, empirical research data, matter, physics, all that sort of stuff. What would you say to that person who said, come on, Jamie, a spiritual world, poltergeists, ghosts, demons, alternate dimensions? How can you expect me to believe that this is real?
I can't expect you to believe that, but I think if you see yourself as someone that finds science interesting, then you should keep an open mind. There are some things that can't be measured by science, and when it comes to humanism, you should really check the source material. It's very much engaged in ideas that are based on some things that have come from occult back histories and sources. So.
The other I think group that potentially might be listening to this. I mean, we have our Christians in the room, and Christians already have a predisposition toward the spiritual world. And so a lot of people are probably thinking, oh, yeah, okay, fair enough. This is fairly par for the course. I can understand this. I have a worldview that somewhat encapsulates what you're saying. But I think there's also another group potentially listening who may not have that predisposition, or maybe they have a very quaint Christian-y, okay, we maybe have angels and demons, maybe there's a hell, maybe there's not, maybe there's a heaven, maybe there's not. But I think there's a group of people that might see this stuff as interesting, like you sourced that sort of stuff as interesting, teenagers and young people, potentially those who are interested, as you were, in psychedelic drugs and things like that. To those people who are kind of curious, who are looking, who are searching, what would you say to that young person?
It's very much real. But praise God that you haven't had to know that firsthand. I think that's a blessing. We shouldn't be really looking into these things. That God is managing those battles, and we should leave them to Him. And sometimes in our stupidity, because that's how I see it. I was pretty stupid. That He's given me a bit of insight to explain what I'd been through. But if you are looking into these things, just start with your Bible. You'll find out, as I have at the end, that it's all explained in perfect detail in the Bible. It really is. It's sort of it seems quite. It seems like a simple or a simplistic answer. It's exactly in my understanding. The Bible has explained these things in enough detail that you need to know already, and I think one of the things that you can hold on to is that God does love each of us, and is protecting us from things that we don't even know about, and why weigh yourselves down with these things that you don't need to when God is already covering you for that. And when it comes to the other side, there's definitely, look, we as Christians, we want to introduce the gospel message. Isn't it obvious that Satan wants to introduce his message as well? It's, of course, that's just, it's almost painfully obvious, and that would be the case if these things were true. And if you believe they are, well, then you should believe that he's very organised. And just as church has strategies, and you can be assured that Satan also has very clear strategies and plans, and is very good at masking his intentions.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Science Radio. It's one of the heavier ones that we've done for a while, but I do truly believe that it was an episode worth doing. You can find an abbreviated version of this episode in text form on our website, scienceofthetimes.org.au. So if you'd like to share Jamie's story with somebody, it'll only take a couple of minutes to read, and hopefully whoever reads it will leave them wanting more. So if you want to check that out, as well as all the other latest articles from Science of the Times, you can go to scienceofthetimes.org.au to see those for free. Please subscribe, rate this podcast, and if you'd really like to help us out, share it with a friend. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.